My usual day week is to work with clients. I'm a marriage therapist, and I specialize in the sexuality areas. And so I work with people of all different faiths, and I think if you look at my work, the general theme there is that I have a passionate belief in the importance of healthy sexuality. That is sexuality that's based on love and intimacy, caring and respect. And I champion a lot of causes that help to promote healthy sexuality. But today I'm going to speak about how I came to do the Porn Trap book with my husband Larry, who's also a therapist, and also some of the things that we learned about pornography that really made us realize that this is an extremely serious problem going on in our culture. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the sexual effects of pornography. Now, you got to understand, I've been doing this work for 30 years, okay, helping people with sexuality problems. So talking about sex is pretty easy for me to do. I'm going to try and really watch what I say today because I don't want to, make people feel uncomfortable. But I'm pretty desensitized. It's a bit like fixing cars. I don't know if that's a great analogy, but, I see people with all different types of problems, from infertility problems to functioning disorders like premature ejaculation and orgasmic difficulty, low sex desire. Now, there was a time in my background where when I first started as a sex therapist back in the late 70s, sounds funny to say that, but, it was a very different scene back there. Back then, there wasn't the home video player hadn't been invented, the internet hadn't been invented, and pornography, when I was a young sex therapist, we were encouraged in the training to recommend pornography as a way to spice up couples' relationships. And that's something I would not do now, of course. And the pornography back then was different than it is today. It wasn't as violent or as extreme. And the whole way that it was presented was as a couple's aid to intimacy, if you can believe that. And of course, what I started noticing is that as time went on, the pornography started changing, and also the way it was used was different. Instead of couples looking at it together and looking at fairly benign kind of things of other couples making love, it turned into being an activity that an individual would do on their own, in private, often in secret, and away from the awareness of a spouse or a partner, and that they would develop a one-on-one relationship with the pornography. So pornography became a sexual outlet, actually competing with a real-life partner, and a way of directing sexual energy and interest outside of a relationship and onto essentially a product. Now, what Larry and I noticed was that people started coming into our practices in the mid to late 1990s, when this coincided with the introduction of the internet. And they would be complaining of very serious problems, like engagements being called off, marriages breaking up, divorces happening because of porn, and also individuals, quite a number of young men coming in because they were experiencing difficulty being able to find a mate and stay in an established relationship with someone because of sexual problems that had been caused by porn. And we started going, okay, this is kind of new. This is different. And we asked our colleagues and other sex therapists and marriage counselors, and they were seeing the same thing, just hordes of people starting to come in for problems caused by porn. And so we wanted to find out more about how to help these clients, and so we started researching about what was going on and how come today's porn is so capable and powerful of having these kinds of effects. And what we found was quite disturbing to us, but we also wanted to create a book that could be used as a resource to educate people and also give them an understanding of what the healing process involves. So the porn trap, the first half of it is about how people get into porn and why it's so powerful and what goes on with the partner and how they hit bottom. And the second half is all about healing, from getting motivated to being able to take action steps to quit porn, how to deal with relapses, how couples can heal, and also how to develop healthy approaches to touch and sexuality, and the joys and benefits of recovery. And Larry, my husband, did some incredible interviews with people who volunteered to tell their stories about how they not only got into porn, but also were able to get away from it. And the stories were so compelling, we just knew we needed to create a book to share them. And we really appreciate the people who volunteered in the research phase. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how people why it's so easy to get into porn. And some of this information is if you're a parent and you're wanting to educate your teenagers or your children about pornography, you can use some of this to let them know kind of the real scoop about what's going on with porn. Now, porn today, you've probably heard in a number of the other presentations how accessible it is, how people can get to it easily through a number of different kinds of devices. It's everywhere. And it can be, from cell phones to the internet to television. Kids trade it on playgrounds. It's, you can filter it in your, use filters, which is helpful. And you can have lots of rules around the internet, but you can't really stop the access because we have just a proliferation of different types of very interesting kinds of delivery systems. And that's very unfortunate because in the past, I think pornography was kind of kept in check through things like scarcity and obscurity and the fear of embarrassment and the expense that people would have to pay in order to get to it. But now with those barriers taken down, it's in our culture so much, unfortunately. And there's also a bunch of prevailing beliefs about it, like that, where people make assumptions about it that are false. Things like, well, if everybody is doing it, it must be safe. If kids can contact it, it must be something for kids. If there's no warning that goes along with it, then it can't be bad for you. So, and it's just that we have this product that's come on the scene so quickly, we haven't had time to really mobilize efforts to research it and to take steps to warn people about it. So there's a lot of commercial exploitation going on of people with it. It lacks regulation. It lacks, there's an aggressive industry that is driving it. And the kind of porn today is on demand. It's interactive too. These delivery systems are themselves very addictive. They have what's called an interval ratio reward system, kind of like the slots in Vegas with the 777. people know when they go to hunt for porn, that at some point they're going to get an image that will do the trick for them, so to speak, but they don't know exactly when it's going to come. And so they can keep out there just looking for it. And even when they find one that is especially stimulating to them, they will keep at it to try and find another one. It's like our brains thrive on this kind of interactive experience where you get a lot of novel information created and you have free access to it, unlimited and infinite. The pornography today is more lifelike, and so I don't know if you're aware, but the word pornography comes from, it's literally translated into writings of or about prostitutes. And the word didn't actually show up in a dictionary until the mid-1850s. It's a relatively new thing, and it really goes with the development of high-tech devices it started with mass production with the printing press, but then when photography came out, it sort of spun up to another level. And then with movies, you got a more lifelike, and each level is that much more exciting and that much more compelling to the user. One of the things that's sad about pornography today is that it really capitalizes on what are understandable needs for children. Children have natural curiosities about sex. They have needs for information about sex. They also have desires to belong to a group, and this kind of trading and collecting that goes on with porn is an experience where they can kind of feel some bonding, especially young boys. There's also a need for positive messages about sex, sexual permission, and that sexual pleasure is okay. And pornography does give that. There is also natural needs that children have to cope with stresses and to deal with feelings of rejection and of waiting. They have a lot of waiting to do before they can get in a sexual relationship. And so pornography has worked its way into addressing some of those needs. Now, it does it with very severe and not helpful consequences, but I think it's important that we're aware that kids are drawn to it for some specific reasons that have to do with developmental processes that are normal. Porn is very exciting. It has a you are there feeling. I often think of it as like a peephole to experience. It is a form of voyeurism. And in voyeurism, a person can look and they don't have to risk. So they can see, and there's a powerful sort of feeling when you're looking and choosing. And that's especially appealing when a person feels insecure or inadequate in a sexual way, which is a common state for young people. The excitement, it comes through our eyes. You know, people often say, well, it's not a drug, how can it be addictive? But it really, our eyes are essentially part of our central nervous system popping out of our head. Okay, so it's actually the idea of porn being ingested into the eyes and going directly to the pleasure centers of the brain. That happens, it changes blood flow immediately and can cause arousal, whether the person likes what they're seeing or agrees with the values of what they're seeing. The person can become aroused by it. And that's kind of a feeling of, for some people, that takes them, it takes them away from feeling almost like responsible for what's happening, because after all, they're just sitting there and this is what's going on. They don't see that they have an active role in this experience. It increases testosterone levels, opiates in the brain, endorphins, adrenaline. These are all very strong feel-good chemicals. So it's a way of kind of medicating oneself. There's also an aspect of it where it actually becomes like the love object. I've talked with clients who can't go on a camping trip because they can't leave their pornography stashes and their collections. And they're very uncomfortable if they're away from high-tech delivery systems because of that. And I met a man who wrote a song about his porn collection as if it were a lover, and how he was going to miss it because he needed to give it up because his girlfriend discovered it. So, you know, it's like this, you can't underestimate the type of attachment that goes on with the object. It becomes the object of desire, and it has had certain experiences where a person associates pleasure, and pleasure in the form of relaxation and satiation from it. In a way, pornography hijacks the wonderful bonding chemicals that we all have in our systems. They're called vasopressins and oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a hormone that's released when a mother has a letdown response when she's nursing a baby, and it increases bonding. It's also released when people do make love, and it's released with orgasm through self-stimulation. And that sense of and so what the person's looking at when that occurs is what they kind of bond with and feel is what's creating the pleasure for them. So this is one of the reasons it can be so hard to let go of pornography, because it has these really strong associations with being a love object. It's kind of sad because it's a mechanical product, you know. It's a virtual product. It's a fantasy, and it can never love back. But the fantasy, when someone's in that fantasy, that dissociative state, they're not thinking about those things. They're just experiencing how it is impacting their brains. And a lot of users can become very preoccupied with it. So it can also, pornography is set up to give the user an illusion of being acceptable and being wanted, and that they're in total control. But what happens is that often becomes an addiction where people crave it, they can't control it, and they continue to use it in spite of negative consequences. Now, one of the things that was so upsetting for me as a sex therapist is how it harms people in ways that they don't realize. Now, there are ways that have to do with just general mental health, like it can create irritability, depression, anger problems. It can create low self-esteem, loss of integrity, and self-centeredness, and problems with family, in the family life, work life, and spiritual life. And it also, though, and in an intimate relationship, and it has, as you've heard from some of the breakout sessions, just can have a devastating effect on an intimate partner who is a secondary victim of the pornography use. But it hijacks a person's healthy sexuality. All these bonding hormones and all these great feelings, those are there to experience with somebody who is a loved one, who you really care about and want to connect with. And I think this is what I see pornography as is as a sexual predator. It actually is a form of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse can be defined as when someone is exploited or dominated through sexual activity or suggestion. And there are often qualities in sexual abuse that involve the loss of innocence, a betrayal of trust, a lack of informed consent, and a generating of shame. And those all go on with porn. So it's sort of like we have this high-tech predator that's out there and with easy access in our homes to ourselves and to our kids. But it teaches all the wrong things about sex. It can make you feel very unattractive because porn stars are picked for certain reasons, that they look good, can look a certain way on camera. For instance, one of the things, most of the females have had breast implants. I think it's like 85%. And in magazine porn, it's 100% are airbrushed. So you don't find freckles or wrinkles or all those things that make a person a real person. It creates this, and also it gives information like the size of a penis in porn. The average size is 8 inches with arousal. And in real life, it's 5.8 inches. That's an average, so you have a variation. But I've met quite a number of young men who, in particular, and young females who feel incredibly inadequate sexually, because they don't measure up. It also teaches a dissociated type of sex where you're looking at a body in terms of like, how can it stimulate me? What's that going to give me? How aroused is it going to make me? Click, click, click. Oh, that one doesn't do it. Well, that one will. And it's sort of like the people are turned into objects. And the problem is when you turn someone into an object, you can feel like you can do anything you want. You can dismiss them, just click off them, disregard them. And that kind of moving away when dissatisfied isn't a great skill to have if you're going to be in a long-term relationship. Or people go in a real relationship, they go through periods of time where they find each other attractive, and sometimes they don't. But it's through their interaction and their caring and their love that they increase attraction again. It blunts the erotic imagination. It's like, here's what sexual fantasy is. And, I'll talk with people and they'll say that their fantasies have been defined by porn. They can't imagine creating a fantasy on their own that doesn't in some way involve something they've seen in porn. And I think that's a real tragedy, because our ability to use our erotic imagination is another thing that keeps sex alive in long-term relationships. So you have, and you also have people moving in directions of more dangerous types of sexual behavior, riskier. A lot of today's porn involves violence, slapping, hitting, choking. I won't go into it all, but it's incredibly rough, and it's been a bit rough for me just counseling sometimes, hearing what people are actually seeing and have become sexually eroticized to, and what they need. They actually end up requiring it in order to get aroused. There are some very specific functioning problems that go on, problems with premature ejaculation through anxiety in a relationship, that when someone has had training through porn, and then also with difficulty getting erections, difficulty, partners have difficulty feeling open to the person who's been using the porn because they feel that the sexual interaction is devoid of love and caring and real emotional connection. And there's problems with getting into these interests that are illegal and risky and dangerous and unhealthy. So it creates when people say, oh, porn is all about sexual freedom, I think there couldn't be a worse form of sexual oppression, because it narrows the definition and the focus of what sex is and the expression. It creates just this one line, this one little span. It lacks mutuality, it lacks laughter, it lacks the capacity for for meaningfulness and deep sensual pleasures that involve whole body experiences. It lacks the ability to have the sexual connection be related to spiritual ecstasy and a sense of being blessed by God, or whatever the higher power is that a person perceives. What I do know, though, is that healing is possible, and people with these problems can move out of them. And one of the first steps is to create a very strong base of motivation. In the porn trap, we have a number of exercises where a person can use their cognitive skills to really write out things like, what really matters to me? There's a questionnaire of, I want to be someone who, and maybe there are things to check off, lists of who is honest, or who can relate, who can be in a long-term marriage. And when you click those, when you check those and you go, okay, how does porn interfere with that? Being able to see clearly and talk about what it is a person fears about letting go of porn is also another really important step for strengthening motivation. Disclosure is important. Being able to engage in a structured process of recovery. We identify 6 action steps that involve disclosing the porn problem, being able to get some type of involved in a recovery program, faith-based or 12-step, individual psychotherapy, couples counseling, being able to remove porn from an environment, just practice really good self-care and healthy ways of taking care of yourself, and because the stronger you are in your body, mind, and spirit, the easier it is to heal from anything, actually. Starting to learn about the difference between healthy sexuality and porn-related sex. And that brings me to one of the posters. This can be free and downloadable on the website healthysex.com. This is, do you know the difference? And it goes between porn-related sex and healthy sexuality. And this is a great thing. You know, both the posters we have on the website, you can get hard copies of these back at the Coalition booth back there. But the hazards of porn, where it's very specific in all the different types of negative consequences, these can be used to put in your computer room. And they're being used that way. They're being used in youth groups. They're being used in churches, in schools, to help kids understand that there is a big difference between healthy sex and porn-related sex, and that there are some very real negative consequences that come from using porn. I think that a lot of the messages people need who are in recovery are things like, you're not alone. They need compassion, not shaming, and this goes true with also talking to young people who've looked at porn and who have been in it, to be able to see that to open the lines of communication, not have punishment be part of this process, because I think it just throws people who've been using porn into a place of a greater isolation and shame. Porn actually makes a man less of a man. It makes him less attractive. Women want men who aren't into porn. It can render a person powerless to it. And it can compromise values and compromise your humanity and ability to have empathy for your fellow human being. And it can lead to the sexual inadequacy and a lot of pain. So staying away from porn is a very smart thing to do. Now, you have on your handout a whole list of suggestions for how you can help to protect, to reduce the likelihood that your child will get involved with pornography. And you can't really, like I said, reduce exposure, but that likelihood that the child will create an enduring relationship with it can be reduced. And that has a lot to do with creating strong, positive attachments with the parents, and the ability to talk about what's going on and having access to positive educational materials about sex. We can't throw sex out and say sex is bad. If you take a stand where it's like, oh, you know, don't talk about pleasure, don't talk about, you know, learning about sex, that's all going to be dangerous. I think what happens is that only makes the child want to go to the porn more, because they lack an alternative source of information where they can learn about healthy sexuality. So within the framework of your own faith, to find and share positive resources with your own child is very important. I want to end with a little quote from a man named Hank, who we interviewed for the book. Now, this is a man who had a collapse at work one day. He had been doing pornography for 72 hours at a time, combining it with drugs, and he would do this on the weekends and then show up for his job. He was a welder, and he'd show up for his job at a factory. And one day he came in after one of these binges he had had, and he stood there and he couldn't work. He couldn't do a thing, and he just collapsed. And he said his conscience wept. He could no longer do it. It was so against who he was as a person, against his values, and the way he realized he was treating and had treating the women who were in the pornographic images. It just all caught up with him. Actually, that kind of internal collapse is a terrific motivation. When people have that real personal awareness, this isn't good for them, they have, it's a good pushing off ground for being able to get out of porn. So he did a lot of recovery, and I was so happy because I talked with him on the phone to get him his copy of the book, and he said he was still had not been back into porn, and he's so glad that he left it. His life has changed in some wonderful ways where he's gotten his integrity back. But here's what he says. He said, I'm more of a human being than I ever was when I was using pornography. I am present and much less detached from other people. I feel more a complete adult because I'm not sexually objectifying people and things anymore. I'm alive with my current partner in a way that I was never alive before when I was intimately involved with a woman. Now, free from porn, I feel like I've been given a wonderful gift, not just of my own consciousness, but of my own humanity. Thank you.